Well, hello there. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. Time then to see what's making the headlines with The Guardian's political editor, Pippa Crerar, and the Whitehall editor of the Daily Mail, Claire Ellicott. Welcome to both of you. Great to see you here in Downing Street as well, with us from now until just before midnight. So, to the front pages, as ever, let's kick off with those. The Eye says it's back to the future after Rishi Sunak took a major political gamble and brought former Prime Minister David Cameron back into Cabinet as his new Foreign Secretary. The Financial Times also leads on the return of David Cameron after Suella Braverman's sacking and the consequent reshuffle. Well, this is how the Metro sees the return of Mr Cameron. Wham, bam, in comes Cam. Claire's paper, the Daily Mail, is in an article that she part authors, it says here. Claire describes it as Rishi's big throw of the dice. Pippa, writing in The Guardian, calls it a stunning political comeback aimed at closing the gap with Labour. Well, according to The Times, it's a comeback from the political wilderness. This is the front of The Sun. Recall me, Dave. The Telegraph says the Cameron return has sparked a backlash from Brexiteers on the right of the party. And finally, the Daily Star says that 88% of women find a bald man sexy, at least that's according to new research by a bunch of eggheads, so the paper says. Somewhere in there, there'll be David Cameron, I'm sure. A reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us and listen to our guests. So let's go to The Guardian's political editor, Pippa Crerar, and the Whitehall editor of the Daily Mail, Claire Ellicott. Lovely to have you both here, penning those front pages for us as well. Pippa, kick off then with The Guardian, picking out two words from your the headline there. Cameron's shock return in a high-stakes reshuffle. First of all, how shocked were you, and how high stakes is it?
Totally shocked, because just half an hour before, Suella Braverman had been sacked, unsurprisingly, we'd all been predicting it, as Home Secretary, and was moved on back to the backbenches. And so obviously the question then was who was going to replace her. There was also speculation around that James Cleverly was going to move from the Foreign Office. And then this car pulls up outside Downing Street, and you and your colleagues, I think it was Sam Coates earlier, Anna, was watching as it all unfolded. Speculation. I think I listened to Kay Burley talking about how ministers arrive in their cars and who was this going to be getting out of the car? And lo and behold, it was David Cameron.
Getting out of a taxi.
Getting out of a taxi. It was an Uber, was it? And lo and behold, it was David Cameron. So, the sort of collective sharp intake of breath right across Westminster, because although several years ago, I think it was 2018, I remember writing stories about speculation that he had his eye on coming back and ideally would like to do the job of Foreign Secretary. That is some time ago, and he hasn't really been in the public eye for the last 12 months, 24 months. So it was a surprise that we were not expecting. So yeah, definitely shocked.
Yeah, and your paper, the Daily Mail, let's look at that, shall we, as well? Rishi's big throw of the dice. So again, that theme of jeopardy. Why do you think that is? Is it because he comes with baggage? Brexit baggage being one of them, for example.
Yes, I mean, you've got David Cameron, who led the Remain campaign. He's now the Foreign Secretary. It's a huge shift. Rishi Sunak sacked his most prominent right-winger in his cabinet, and he's brought in David Cameron, the man who led the Remain campaign. It's extraordinary, and it's a real kind of move from Rishi. It's he doesn't have a lot to lose. He's got 1 year left to the election. He's just taken the view, I think, that he has to do something bold. There has to be a major gamble. And David Cameron, like we say, we were also shocked when he emerged today. He is a huge gamble, and it will be really interesting to see, how it pans out. They've got huge differences in policies, and he was a surprise appointment.
Well, let's take a look at the why then, shall we? The argument is that he's jettisoned the populist right wing of the Conservative Party, that he was trying to pacify them and the red wall seats. Now it's all about the shires, about the home counties, about the traditional Conservative areas, trying to prop those up. So would you say this is actually a retreat then for the Conservative Party in where it's firefighting? It's digging its trenches somewhere else.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of that, although that's not new. We've seen Rishi Sunak pivot towards the blue wall ever since he's been in power. He doesn't have the allure that Boris Johnson seemed to have the red wall. Brexit was not the issue that it was in some of those former Labour seats, which went over wholesale to the Conservatives in 2019. So this is not a new thing, but it definitely feels like it's a change from this time, is it only really a month ago, when he was at Conservative Party conference, standing on the stage, promising to be the change candidate, and distancing himself from 30 years of political consensus, saying he wanted to overturn it. Lo and behold, 5 weeks later, he brings back a former Prime Minister who was in charge of the Conservative Party for 12 of those years and Prime Minister for 6 of those years, a big chunk of time, and quite clearly drops the strategy of being the change candidate, obviously recognising that it was fairly incredible when your party had been in power for 13 years to try and present yourself as something new when up against Labour at the next election.
Yeah, that was always possibly a tall order, possibly more so now. If we take a look at the eye with that theme, back to the future. It's what many commentators have said today.
Yes, I mean, you've got David Cameron's just the really interesting appointment. That he was a successful Tory leader. He won elections. He knows how to win elections. Bringing him back in also brings some of the moderates in the Tory party who were feeling slightly alienated by people like Suella Braverman's, rhetoric around homeless people and around the protests. I think he really needed to sort of bring someone in to maybe counter her. But I think David Cameron obviously is a surprising person to have brought in.
So, Suella Braverman, it's amazing how she's become yesterday's woman so quickly. Whatever David Cameron's appointment has done, it has been a massive distraction, has it not? So what happens to her now? And did Rishi Sunak, work out that the threat of her on the backbenches wasn't possibly as great as he feared, and that it was time for her to go?
Yeah, it was kind of like the dead cat strategy extraordinaire, wasn't it? I mean, one surefire way of getting rid of Suella Braverman's sacking off the front pages was appointing David Cameron. Not that I'm suggesting that's why they did it, but yes, absolutely. I mean, there was concern inside Number 10 previously that it was better to keep Suella Braverman inside the tent than it was to have her outside. I think that feeling persisted despite the fact that over very many issues she came forward with quite inflammatory rhetoric, which actually really quite upset quite a lot of more moderate Tory MPs.
Specifically, the homelessness issue, do you think?
It was suggesting that homelessness was a lifestyle choice, and that tents should be banned from, charities should be banned from allowing tents on the streets. And then there was stuff around the march, calling the Palestinian marches, calling them hate marches. But they're just sort of the latest iterations in a variety of really quite powerful, hateful rhetoric.
The hurricane of global migration, for example.
Invasions on our coast, talking about people coming over in small boats across the channel. So, but I think there was calculations done in Number 10, and I think they worked out, certainly the public polling that's been issued today by YouGov and others reflects the private polling, which they'd done themselves, which is that an overwhelming majority of people thought that they'd gone too far. And she was in danger, had already retoxified the Conservative Party and the Conservative Party brand, which obviously has been buffeted over the last few years anyway. And they calculated that it was better off having her outside, that the so-called rebellion, or so-called rebels, was small in number, and their minds would be focused by the impending general election. That they may well try and cause some trouble, but it was unlikely to be enough or sufficient enough to really put Sunak in danger, to put Sunak's position in peril. And the calculation was it was better to have her out after all.
Yes, and if we take a look at the Financial Times, they pick up on things that are happening later this week, not least the Rwanda policy. Their paragraph says Sunak faces a new clash with hardline colleagues when the Supreme Court rules on Braverman's plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. If it is deemed unlawful, she's expected to renew calls for Britain to quit the European Convention on Human Rights, which is always something coming this week, isn't it? So what happens now to the right wing of the Conservative Party, who can already coalesce around something tangible this week?
Well, I think that was one of the factors in sacking her when Rishi Sunak did, because on Wednesday we get this ruling, and there's the feeling in government, there's a lot of pessimism that it won't actually go in the government's favour. If that's the case, Suella Braverman could have used it as a way of quitting to further her leadership ambitions. This is the thinking in Downing Street, and saying, we need to quit the ECHR. There's no way, we can carry on like this. There is no way we can stop the boats without doing it. So the idea, I think, behind the Downing Street thinking today was to get rid of her today. So if she couldn't kind of resign on Wednesday as a bit of a martyr. And you're right that the right wing of the party will coalesce around her, and they will do now. There is the kind of debate about how many people we're talking about. Some people put it up to 50, MPs who would back her. Others put it as low as 6 or 7. It's not quite clear. We've only had one person, Andrea Jenkins, to have put in a no confidence letter.
Yes, because Rishi's been a year, they now can. Is that the point?
Yes, and so the ruling on Wednesday will be really interesting, and it'll be a real moment for Rishi Sunak to decide where he takes the party, because we know he doesn't want to take the UK out the ECHR, and we know that a lot of the members of his cabinet, not least Cameron, don't want that to happen either. So it looks like that policy is probably dead in the water, but it does give the right wing of the party something to kind of fight for.
Well, that's the question now, isn't it? What is the Conservative Party now? Many people suggesting that David Cameron wouldn't junk all the appointments he currently has for sort of 4 or 5 months in office. So it does look like the election will be in the autumn next year. But who will be presenting, what will the face be of the Conservative Party, in the fight against Sir Keir Starmer's party?
Well, it'll have to be Rishi Sunak. He's the Prime Minister and he still outpolls his party.
But do we know what he stands for now?
Well, I mean, it looks like if today is anything to go by, it's a much more moderate face than we've seen previously, even if his natural inclination on social issues is more traditional than David Cameron's, and I think it is. I think he's recognised that elections are won in the centre ground, and flirting with the right is not going to bring him sufficient votes in order to win the next election. And of course, it's not just David Cameron, it's also keeping James Cleverly, a fairly emollient, fairly moderate figure in the Conservative Party, as Home Secretary, or moving him to Home Secretary rather, and it's keeping Jeremy Hunt, crucially, as Chancellor. There's been lots of speculation around about Jeremy Hunt's future, particularly because of the pressure that he's coming under from Conservative MPs to cut taxes at the autumn statement of the budget going into the general election. So far, he's resisted that and said we need to concentrate on the economy first. We need to drive down inflation. That would be the best tax cut for people, and only then can we concentrate on cutting income taxes or any other taxes, business or whatever. But that needs to be the priority. That's gone down really badly with some in the party, particularly on the right. But by sticking to that line, by putting out a press release today, Downing Street confirming that Jeremy Hunt was going to remain in post. They don't normally do that. They announce who's been appointed and who's been sacked. It shows that he has the Prime Minister's support, and hopefully from their perspective, will put an end to those rumours. But it says quite a lot about the complexion of the Conservative Party going forward.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview. With me once again, the Guardian's political editor, Pippa Crerar, and the Whitehall editor of the Daily Mail, Claire Ellicott. Welcome back to both of you. We've talked about David Cameron and Suella Braverman, and we've talked about, briefly, the new Home Secretary, James Cleverly. The job doesn't get any easier, does it? We saw what happened at the weekend with the Palestinian marches and the right-wing trouble. But let's also talk about the Rwanda plan in more detail. Suggestion is it needs to go ahead, even if it means leaving the ECHR, Claire. So the problem still looms large, is what I'm trying to say.
Yes, I mean, this is huge for the government. This is essentially one of Rishi Sunak's key, it's one of his 5 pledges, and it's essentially what his entire election campaign hinges on. If he can't stop the vote, I don't think the Tories are going to be able to convince people that there is a reason to vote for them. So Wednesday is going to be a huge plank of that. The idea is, the Rwanda scheme is to act as a deterrent to stop migrants crossing, and the government will get the Supreme Court decision on whether or not that can go ahead. We have Robert Jenrick tonight saying that, the immigration minister saying that it will have to go ahead, no ifs, no buts. There's lots of different ways to achieve that, and it's not clear whether they would have to rejig the treaty or whether they would have to, come up with some way of words around it that would help them, or use other countries as safe countries, if the government does lose this case. But it's going to be a huge problem for James Cleverly. He's just been appointed. It's going to be his first big job, and in the Home Office. So it is going to be massive for the government, and everyone will be watching closely.
Yes, so trouble ahead on domestic, trouble ahead on foreign policy, as we know as well. David Cameron has already had to meet the Indian Foreign Minister, I think it was today. He had to be sworn in the House of Lords, but he's got this acute problem of the Israel-Hamas war as well. And we certainly know that the hospitals in Gaza are really acute now. Joe Biden has waded in, talking about the need for hospitals to be safe, including Al-Shifa Hospital. This is on the front page, I think, of your paper, Pippa.
Yes, and actually it follows that really heart-rending photograph which we published on the front page of Monday's paper of those babies, those premature babies at the hospital, sort of 7 or 8 to a bed, all crammed together and wrapped up warm, because the hospital had run out of fuel to run their generators, and so they couldn't keep them in incubators anymore. And it was one of the most, I think, awful images of this conflict. And we've heard some horrendous stories both from Israel and from Gaza. But seeing those innocent lives, those tiny babies who had, this is nothing to do with, I think really brought it home. And we're reporting on the front page of tomorrow's paper that Israeli forces have reached the gates of the hospital, which is, of course, Gaza's largest. But it's not just those dozens of babies remaining trapped inside. There's hundreds of other people as well. And there was suggestions from doctors that they had to move away people from the windows because anybody that walked past was potentially a target for an Israeli sniper. Of course, what the Israelis say is that the hospital is being weaponized by Hamas, who are well known for using civilian infrastructure to hide behind as a headquarters for some of their senior commanders, which is why it's apparently a target for the Israelis. But there are lots of people in there that are incredibly vulnerable, that have been, probably hundreds that were ill anyway before the attacks, before the bombings even took place. And across Gaza as well, other hospitals too are under so much pressure. It really is a desperate situation.
Yeah. Elsewhere in the reshuffle, of course, we know that Therese Coffey has gone as Environment Secretary, replaced by Steve Barclay, whose job as Health Secretary goes to Victoria Atkins. But your paper's picked up Esther McVeigh, former TV presenter, obviously still does a bit of it now, as we know. Why have you picked up on her? Is she the sort of the last right-winger standing? Is that the way to describe her?
Well, I think that's fair. So Rishi Sunak obviously got rid of his most right-wing member of the cabinet with Suella Braverman. And the right of the party, are not happy about that. We've already seen, as you mentioned, Andrea Jenkins putting in a letter of no confidence. There's a group around Suella who are not happy about it. And so putting in Esther McVeigh is something of a sop to the right of his party, which otherwise might look, as you say, James Cleverly's quite moderate, David Cameron's a Remainer. You have Esther McVeigh, who's come in as the Minister for Common Sense. She's being known as, she's there to sort out the wokery in the civil service, and she's going to, hopefully, she's going to be a member of cabinet, she's going to be attending cabinet. So she will have a prominent voice around the table. She'll be able to voice her opinions on, for the right of the party, stand up for them, and it will serve Rishi Sunak, no doubt, as a way of keeping the right of the party happy.
Well, David Cameron making the front pages certainly tonight, but the person who would, I guess, if today's reshuffle had not happened, Sir Bobby Charlton, laid to rest, the world of football, paying tribute at his funeral today, the legend that is Sir Bobby.